"Gold digger," they whispered as the single mom dated the 90-year-old millionaire. But the elderly man finds his son and the single mother together in the bathroom and discovers something. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., as usual, but the 30-year-old single mum had been awake for half an hour already, watching the first glimmers of light over the city that never sleeps from her small apartment window. Her fingers trembled slightly as she made coffee, not from the early morning chill, but from the anxiety that accompanied her every morning before heading to work at the most luxurious nursing home in the metropolis. Her 4-year-old daughter was still sound asleep, her curly hair spread across the pillow like sunbeams. She kissed the girl's warm forehead and whispered a silent promise that everything would be all right, even when her own doubts screamed the opposite. Her job as a nurse at the upscale assisted living facility was all she had to support her family, but every day there was a battle against scornful glances and muttered comments. The bus ride to the city's upscale district took an hour and 15 minutes, time she used to mentally review the special care each resident needed. The contrast between her simple neighborhood and the mansions surrounding the nursing home was stark, as if they were completely different worlds sharing the same city. The gilded gates and perfectly manicured lawns of her workplace seemed to scream her status as an outsider in that universe of privilege. Upon arrival, she donned the immaculate white uniform and pinned her hair into a perfect bun, transforming herself into the dedicated professional everyone expected. The other employees greeted her with forced politeness, but she felt the weight of their judgment in every glance. To them, a young single mother working among millionaires was a source of constant suspicion, as if her presence there was a threat to the natural order of things. Her first patient of the morning was always the most challenging, a 90-year-old patriarch who had accumulated an impressive fortune over decades of savvy investments. His wealth was legendary in the city, his assets ranging from valuable stocks to gold holdings and properties scattered across the country. Even in his advanced age, his mind remained sharp as a tack, and his natural charisma made everyone around him defer to his imposing presence. When she entered the luxurious suite, she found the elderly man sitting in his Italian leather armchair, reading the Wall Street Journal with the concentration of a man half his age. He raised his piercing blue eyes and smiled with a gentleness that completely disarmed her. Unlike the other residents, who treated her like furniture, he always greeted her by name and asked about her daughter with genuine interest. "Good morning, my dear," he said in a still, strong voice, folding the newspaper carefully. "How is our little artist today? Still drawing those magnificent horses?" The question caught her off guard, as it always did when someone showed real interest in her personal life. She smiled shyly as she checked his morning medications, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. Few people knew that her daughter loved to draw animals, and the fact that he remembered such details touched her deeply. During his routine care, he told fascinating stories about his past deals, talked about his travels around the world, and shared memories of an extraordinary life. She found herself listening intently to every word, temporarily forgetting her own worries. There was something mesmerizing about the way he narrated his experiences, mixing decades of wisdom with a refined humor that made her laugh genuinely. What impressed her the most was how he treated her with absolute respect, never making comments about her single mother status or her humble origins. To him, she was simply a person worthy of consideration, something rare in an environment where her worth seemed to be measured only by the bank account she didn't have. As the weeks passed, their conversations became more intimate and personal. He asked about her dreams, her fears, her financial struggles, always offering practical advice or simply listening with respectful attention. She began to realize that she eagerly awaited the moments they spent together, finding in him an understanding and kindness she had forgotten existed. One morning, he gently held her hand as she adjusted his pillows, and the touch sent an electric current through her body. His eyes sparkled with an intensity that made her blush, and for a moment the air between them was charged with an inexplicable tension. She quickly withdrew her hand, confused by the conflicting feelings that surged in her chest. "Forgive me," he murmured, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. "It's just been so long since someone brought so much light into my days. You can't imagine how your presence transforms this bleak place into something close to paradise." The words hit her like a lightning bolt, leaving her breathless. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such sincerity and vulnerability. She felt her heart race dangerously and realized that she was walking in uncharted and potentially dangerous territory. That afternoon, while finishing her care with other residents, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. The other employees began to notice how long she lingered in the patriarch's room, and the malicious whispers increased in the hallways. Some veteran nurses made venomous comments about ambitious young women who took advantage of lonely old men, and every word was like a dagger to her pride. When she got home, she found her daughter playing with dolls on the living room floor, creating elaborate stories about princesses and castles. The child's innocence made her question whether she was making the right decisions, whether she was jeopardizing the stability she had fought so hard to build. The bills piled up on the kitchen table, reminding her cruelly of her precarious financial reality. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she couldn't sleep. Her mind constantly returned to the moment when he held her hand, to the way his eyes sparkled, to the affectionate words that still echoed in her ears. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen and valued by someone, but at the same time, she knew that she was treading on a minefield that could blow her quiet life into 1,000 pieces. The following days became an emotional roller coaster that left her exhausted. The patriarch seemed to have made a silent decision to win her over, and his gestures of affection intensified in a subtle but constant way. Fresh flowers appeared in her room every morning, always accompanied by elegantly written notes with poetic quotes or philosophical reflections that made her sigh involuntarily. During the morning care, he began to share intimate details of his life, talking about the wife he had lost 2 decades ago and about the loneliness that was slowly consuming him. His confidences created a dangerous intimacy between them, and she found herself being pulled into a whirlwind of emotions that she didn't know how to control. The way he looked at her had changed completely, charged with an intensity that made her whole body tremble. The first serious complication arose when the nursing home supervisor called her in for a private conversation. The older woman, with impeccably styled grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses, looked at her with an expression that mixed disapproval and feigned concern. The luxurious office, with mahogany furniture and Persian rugs, seemed intimidating as a courtroom. "We've been receiving some comments about your professional conduct," the supervisor said, flipping through a file with an air of importance. "Some employees have noticed that you spend excessive time with a particular resident, and this is generating unpleasant speculation about your intentions." The words hit like slaps, making her face burn with shame and indignation. She tried to explain that she was only fulfilling her professional obligations, but the supervisor interrupted her with an imperious wave of her hand, making it clear that the conversation was not a discussion, but a formal warning. "Understand that this facility caters to very influential people with considerable assets," the woman continued, adjusting her glasses with calculated precision. "Any behavior that could be interpreted as inappropriate or self-serving will be treated with maximum rigor. I suggest you maintain an appropriate emotional distance from all residents, especially those with more substantial financial resources." As she left the room, she felt as if she had been publicly humiliated. The other employees watched her with poorly disguised, malicious smiles, and the whispers followed her footsteps through the gleaming hallways. Some veteran nurses made a point of commenting loudly about certain people who tried to take advantage of vulnerable situations, always making sure she heard every venomous word. When she arrived at the patriarch's room that afternoon, he immediately sensed her distress. His experienced eyes read the sadness in her face as if it were an open book, and the genuine concern in his expression almost made her burst into tears right there. "What happened, my dear?" he asked in a soft voice, reaching out his hand to her. "Did someone hurt you?" She couldn't bring herself to tell him about the humiliation she had suffered, but she also couldn't completely hide her pain. He seemed to understand the situation instinctively, and his expression hardened with a controlled fury that she had never seen before. For a few seconds, she glimpsed the powerful man he had been for decades, capable of moving mountains with a single word. "Don't let small people diminish your light," he said firmly, holding her hands in his. "You are worth more than all of them put together, and one day they will understand that." The intensity of his feelings for her became impossible to ignore when, a few days later, he made a statement that changed everything between them. During a rainy afternoon, while she was organizing his medications, he got up from his armchair with difficulty and walked over to where she was, stopping so close that she could smell the refined, masculine cologne he always wore. "I've fallen in love with you," he said simply, as if he were commenting on the weather. "I know it's crazy. I know I'm a foolish old man, but I can no longer pretend that these feelings don't exist. You've brought purpose back into my life." The world seemed to stop at that moment. She stared at him in absolute shock, feeling her heart beating so hard that she was sure he could hear it. Part of her had always known that this moment would come, but being face to face with reality was completely different from her secret fantasies. I don't know what to say," she murmured, taking a step back. "This is impossible. People will talk. They'll think that you're interested in my money." He finished with a sad smile. "My dear, I built a financial empire because I learned to read people like no other. You are incapable of falsehood or manipulation. Your heart is pure as crystal." The following weeks were filled with constant internal torment. He respected her space, but his eyes followed her with an adoration that left her breathless. Small gifts began to appear in her locker in the changing room. A book of poetry, a silk scarf, a small necklace with a stone that perfectly matched the color of her eyes. Each gesture increased her confusion and guilt. The situation became even more complicated when she discovered that other residents began to treat her differently. Some watched her with poorly disguised curiosity, others with obvious disapproval. The families who visited regularly whispered among themselves when she passed by, and she could feel the weight of their judgments like stones on her shoulders. It was during one of those turbulent family visits that she had her first encounter with the patriarch's son. The man arrived at the nursing home on a Friday afternoon, driving a black sports car that cost more than she would earn in 10 years. She watched him from the second-floor window, immediately noticing the resemblance to his father. The same confident posture, the same elegant bearing, but with a youthful and vibrant energy that made her pulse quicken involuntarily. When they finally met in the main hallway, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. He was devastatingly handsome, with eyes that mixed the intensity of his father with something more dangerous and wild. He wore a suit that certainly cost a fortune, and every movement of his exuded power and security. For an awkward moment, they simply stared at each other, as if time had stopped around them. "You must be my father's special nurse," he said finally, and there was something in his tone that she couldn't decipher. Distrust, curiosity, or perhaps something more unsettling. "He talks about you a lot." "I'm just doing my job," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervousness that overwhelmed her completely. "I'm sure you are," he retorted, but his eyes examined her in a way that made her feel as if she were being X-rayed. Maybe we can talk in private sometime. I have many questions about the care my father has been receiving." There was a subtle threat in his words, a promise that he would not be as easily won over as his father. As he walked away, she stood in the hallway, trembling slightly, and with the strange feeling that her life had become infinitely more complicated. His masculine scent still lingered in the air, confusing her senses and awakening sensations that she shouldn't be feeling. The investigation began subtly but relentlessly. The patriarch's son discreetly hired a private investigator to scour every detail of her life, from her family background to her daily habits. She didn't know it, but her every move was being documented, photographed, and meticulously analyzed by professional eyes, looking for any evidence of misconduct or unbridled ambition. During the next couple of weeks, strangers started showing up in places she frequented. A man in a dark suit at the supermarket where she shopped, an elegant woman at the park where she took her daughter to play, always maintaining a respectful distance, but observing everything with calculated attention. She chalked these coincidences up to chance, unaware that her life had become an open book for anyone with enough resources to hire the best professionals. The community center where she'd enrolled her daughter in art activities became the stage for a discovery that would change everything. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she arrived after work to pick up the girl, always racing against time between her double shifts. It was on one of those rushed afternoons that she noticed a man watching the children through the glass fence, his back to her, but with a familiar posture that made her stop abruptly. When he turned around, she felt the world spin as she recognized the patriarch's son. He was dressed casually, in dark jeans and a simple white shirt, but still radiated that natural elegance that seemed to be part of his DNA. Most disturbing was the expression on his face, not the hostile distrust she expected, but something close to admiration as he watched her daughter draw with absolute concentration. "She's very talented," he said, approaching slowly, as if afraid to scare her. My father wasn't exaggerating when he talked about the horses she draws. The revelation that he knew intimate details about her daughter hit her like a punch to the gut. Her legs trembled, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. How did he know about the drawings? How long had he been watching her family without her noticing? Fear and anger mixed in an emotional storm that left her speechless. "You're spying on me," she accused, trying to keep her voice down so as not to alarm the other mothers present. "Why are you doing this?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed nervousness for the first time since she'd met him. His eyes, so like his father's, showed an internal conflict that she didn't expect to see. For a moment, he seemed just a young and confused man, not the powerful and intimidating businessman she'd met at the nursing home. "Initially, yes," he admitted with brutal honesty. "I wanted to protect my father from someone I thought was an opportunist. But after watching you these past few weeks, seeing how you live, how you treat your daughter, how you struggle to give her everything you can." He paused, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that made her feel like she was being truly seen for the first time. "I was wrong about you. Completely wrong." The conversation was interrupted when her daughter came running out of the activity room, proudly carrying a new drawing. The child stopped when she saw the strange man talking to her mother. But instead of hiding, she smiled shyly and held out the colorful paper for him to see. "Look, Mommy, I drew a castle where happy horses live," the girl said with the innocent confidence that only children possess. He knelt down to be at the child's height, examining the drawing with respectful seriousness. "That's the most beautiful castle I've ever seen," he said sincerely. "These horses look really happy living here." The way he interacted with her daughter completely disarmed her defenses. There was no condescension or pretense in his gestures, just a genuine attention that made the girl's heart open instantly. For the next 15 minutes, she watched fascinated as he patiently listened to all the elaborate stories the child invented about her drawings. When they finally said goodbye, he asked to speak with her alone the next day. "There are things I need to tell you," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that intrigued her deeply. "About my father, about my family, about what I've discovered these past few weeks." That night she barely managed to sleep, her mind spinning between confusion, anger, and an inexplicable attraction that refused to be ignored. The patriarch's son disturbed her in a completely different way from his father. Where the elderly man aroused tenderness and admiration, the young man provoked a sexual tension that left her restless and ashamed of her own thoughts. The scheduled meeting took place at a discreet coffee shop away from the nursing home, a simple place where she felt more comfortable than in the luxurious environments to which he was accustomed. He arrived punctually, bringing a leather briefcase that he carefully placed on the table between them. "First, I want to apologize," he began, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "What I did was invasive and wrong. You deserved honesty, not secret investigation." He opened the briefcase and took out several photographs and documents. "But what I discovered has completely changed my perspective on you and on myself." The photographs showed intimate moments of her life. She helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, sharing her lunch with a child who had no food at school, working during the early hours in a second job to supplement her income. Each image told a story of kindness and sacrifice that she didn't even realize she was living. "You're not just a good person," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're extraordinary. And I realized that my concern about your intentions toward my father was masking something much more disturbing for me." She looked at him with growing curiosity, feeling that something fundamental was about to be revealed. He took a deep breath before continuing, as if gathering courage to jump off a cliff. "I've fallen in love with you," he confessed, the words coming out in an urgent whisper. "From the first moment I saw you in the hallway of the nursing home. All this investigation, all this opposition to the relationship with my father was just a desperate way to deny what I was feeling." The world seemed to stop around her. The words echoed in her mind like distant bells, mixing with the noise of the coffee shop and the conversations of the other customers. She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How was it possible that two men from the same family had fallen in love with her at the same time? "I know it's impossible," he continued, misinterpreting her silence as rejection. "I know you love my father, and I know I have no right to complicate your life even more. But I can't pretend these feelings don't exist anymore." His confession stirred a storm of conflicting emotions in her chest. Guilt for feeling something for him, while his father showed such pure love, confusion about her own feelings, and an undeniable physical attraction that pulsed between them like electricity in the air. When he reached out to touch hers on the table, she didn't pull it away, allowing his fingers to intertwine with hers in a gesture that sealed a destiny that neither of them could have foreseen. The following days were of absolute emotional agony. She found herself divided between two impossible loves, carrying the weight of secrets that threatened to destroy everything she had built. The patriarch continued to demonstrate his affection with increasingly grand gestures, while the son began to visit him with suspicious frequency, creating tense moments where the three met in the same environment. The sexual tension between her and the young businessman was palpable, creating a charged atmosphere whenever they crossed paths in the corridors of the nursing home. They avoided direct eye contact, but when their eyes met accidentally, the intensity was suffocating. He invented excuses to appear during her shifts, always maintaining the appearance of a worried son, but she felt the weight of his desire in every word spoken. The first crisis came when the patriarch announced his intention to change his will. During a tense family meeting in the luxurious office of the nursing home, he declared that he intended to leave a considerable portion of his fortune to her, officially recognizing the love he felt and ensuring that she never suffered want again. The family's reaction was explosive and predictable. The other heirs protested violently, accusing her of manipulation and emotional blackmail. A hysterical niece shouted that she was a gold digger who had bewitched the patriarch to steal the family's money. The environment became toxic, with accusations flying in all directions, while she remained silent, feeling like an intruder in the middle of a storm she had helped to create. The patriarch's son, surprisingly, came to her defense. "You don't know this woman," he said firmly, facing the furious looks of the relatives. "She has more integrity in one finger than all of you combined. If my father chose to love her, it was because he recognized in her qualities that you are incapable of seeing." His defense deeply moved her, but also increased her guilt. How could he protect her publicly while they harbored secret feelings for each other? The situation had become a web of lies and omissions that threatened to destroy everyone. The definitive crisis came 3 weeks later, when the patriarch suffered a sudden illness during dinner. She was finishing her shift when she heard screams coming from the main dining room. She ran to find him slumped in his armchair, his face pale and his breathing irregular. Panic took over everyone present, but she maintained professional calm, applying first aid while calling the ambulance. During the terrifying hours that followed in the hospital, she remained by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement. The family gradually arrived, but kept their distance, as if the patriarch's serious condition was her fault. Only the son stayed close, offering silent support that comforted her more than it should have. It was during the second night in the hospital that everything changed forever. She had fallen asleep in the uncomfortable chair next to the bed when she woke up with a strange feeling. She opened her eyes to find the son watching her with an expression of devastating tenderness. They were alone in the room, the patriarch sleeping peacefully after the crisis had passed. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, but didn't make a move to pull away when he approached. "I know," he replied, kneeling beside her chair, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore. I can't stay away from you any longer." What happened next was as inevitable as a storm. He touched her face gently, and she leaned into the touch like a flower towards the sun. When their lips met, it was as if the world exploded around them. The kiss was desperate, charged with weeks of repressed tension and forbidden love that could no longer be denied. They separated breathless, but before they could fully process what had happened, a familiar voice made them freeze in absolute terror. "Well, well," said the patriarch, who had woken up silently and was watching everything with alert eyes and an enigmatic smile. "Finally, you've stopped pretending." Shock paralyzed them. She felt as if the ground had disappeared under her feet, while 1,000 excuses formed in her mind without finding voice. The son paled visibly, preparing for the explosion of anger that would surely come. But what the patriarch said next left them completely stunned. "I knew from the first day that you would fall in love," he confessed, struggling to sit up in bed. "You are perfect for each other. Anyone with eyes could see that." The revelation that followed was even more shocking. The patriarch explained that he had orchestrated everything from the beginning, pretending to fall in love with her, to force his son to confront his own feelings. He had perceived the instant attraction between them at their first meeting and decided to act as Cupid in an elaborate and dangerous way. "My time in this world is running out," he said, with a voice choked with emotion. "My biggest concern was leaving my son alone, unable to open himself to true love. But then you appeared, and I saw in him a transformation that I didn't imagine was possible." He explained how he had played the role of the enamored suitor to awaken his son's protective jealousy, how he had talked about changes in the will to force a crisis that would bring them closer. Each romantic gesture, each declaration of love, had been calculated to create the perfect situation for them to discover their true feelings. "Do you forgive me for this manipulation?" he asked, extending his hands to both of them. "I just wanted to make sure you found the happiness you deserve." Tears ran freely down her face as she understood the magnitude of the sacrifice he had made. Relinquishing the love he felt for her to guarantee his son's happiness was an act of generosity that transcended anything she could imagine. The young businessman hugged his father tightly, whispering words of gratitude and forgiveness between emotional sobs. The months that followed were of adaptation and growth. She left her job at the nursing home to manage social projects funded by the family, discovering a natural vocation for helping people in vulnerable situations. The community center where she took her daughter became the first of many projects they developed together, combining his resources with her expertise to create real changes in the community. The wedding took place in an intimate ceremony, with the patriarch as the proud best man and her daughter as the radiant flower girl. The girl adapted perfectly to the new family, finding in her stepfather the father figure she had always wanted, and in her step-great-grandfather a tireless storyteller who spoiled her without limits. The transformation was complete and profound. She learned that she deserved to be loved not for her usefulness or sacrifice, but simply for who she was. He discovered that true wealth was not in his bank account, but in the family they had built together. And the patriarch found in the new extended family the purpose he had lost with age, dedicating his last years to being the grandfather he never thought he would be. 2 years later, when she held the newborn baby in her arms, a boy who carried the blue eyes of the family, she looked around the hospital room and saw 3 generations of love around her. The patriarch, now 92 years old but still lucid and charismatic, held his 6-year-old great-granddaughter on his lap as she admired her baby brother. Her husband kissed her forehead softly, whispering words of love and gratitude. The simple nurse, who had arrived at the luxurious nursing home carrying only modest dreams and plenty of love to give, had transformed into a fulfilled woman, surrounded by a family that loved her unconditionally. And it had all started with a wise patriarch who understood that the greatest gift he could give his son wasn't money or property, but the true love that would last forever.